Okay, I'm talking to Nicholas today. Please tell my audience what your current job is.
So my name is Nick Nguyen, and I am currently the Public Disclosure Officer at the NATO Archives. So what that means is I deal with the declassification and public disclosure of NATO information that used to be classified but is now available to the public for historical research.
All right. And you've been the exhibitions manager for the NATO archives. Tell me what emotions you have wanted to put front and center for this work.
Okay. So yeah, one of the side jobs of being, working as the public disclosure officer is making sure that the work that we do in publicly disclosing information gets seen by a public, right? And so if you don't know that this stuff exists, you're not going to search it out, right? And so it's up to us to find ways, and again, it was my task through exhibitions to find ways to actually, make people care, right? It's like, okay, well, so we did all this work, so what's the big deal? Okay. And since, like again, telling NATO's history, right? Again, it's storytelling, right? And so you're asking me what emotions I wanted to hit. Well, the
Yeah.
key one is curiosity, right? I
Oh,
don't know if that you can call that an emotion, but it's an engagement, right? It's just like, okay, if I'm hitting some buttons, if I've got a pool of data and I'm taking out certain points in order to tell a story, you know, what is enough of a carrot to lure you in to look at all the other points of data, right? Because there's a lot, right? The declassifying documents is a lot. And, for a lot of people, and I would argue in Canada, because I was the same way, if you think about NATO, you're not really sure what it is, right? You have an idea of what it is, but you don't have a clue, you don't really have a real clue of what it is and, for example, what it means to work there and what it is to work there, what it does, right? And the movies have, again, popular cinema has done a certain kind of a job of using NATO as some kind of international organization to, basically make, the threat international, right? Oh, if NATO's involved, then the whole world, there's a big alliance, right? So, and usually if you think of NATO and the Cold War, you're thinking espionage and spies, right? And so a lot of this work that I do is to kind of demythologize some of this stuff, right? To demystify it, right? And demystify it not through cold fact, but through curiosity, right? Like, oh, so many times I would try to, contextualize history with a capital H or popular history, what people understand about history, locate locate NATO's actions or its decisions or everything or how it reacted to something within that context. So then it's something relatable, right? Because if you can't relate to the material, it's a little too distant, and then you're not really going to care, right? So that's kind of been the drive behind, what I think about when I do the work, right? Like, how do I make people care, right? How do I make them, really give, like spend a, because these exhibitions, I should point out, take place at NATO headquarters. So it's an office building. It's not a museum, right? So people don't pay like they would in a museum to spend time to read everything, right? So if you're lucky, you got 5 minutes as you go from meeting to meeting and
mhm.
you see something. All right. So how does it grab your attention, right? That's certain. That's kind of the things that I learned in doing exhibitions in an office environment. Just kind of like you gotta retain the integrity of the information and the way you want to communicate without degrading it into like again like the simple bytes, right? So there's always that negotiation.
I love it. And so my next question is: are there consistent principles in the work applied in these exhibitions, or is there something else beside curiosity that you apply?
Sure. Well, I mean, again, it's very pedagogical as well. You want to teach some, and it's one of them teachable moments, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, here's a teachable history moment, right? Because there's a certain kind of milestone or historical information that, there's a reason for it to be declassified as opposed to just, okay, we got to just do this to look good. Okay, somebody's requested this information, right? So, for example, one of the, two cases that I've worked with where you have a country, right, who was not a part of NATO at the time, but who's, and so they don't have access to this information, right? I'm speaking mainly of the Czech Republic and Poland, for example.
Oh,
But let's focus on the Czech Republic especially, right? Because it has a lot of echoes to what's going on today, right? There's a certain moment in 1968, and this is their ally, Soviet tanks rolled across the borders, and in a massive, in a massive move forward to basically occupy Czechoslovakia because they didn't like the way things were going. Right? They were falling out of line with the Communist Party line. Okay, so, it's a major national historical moment, in the Czech Republic. It's a defining moment in their national history. Okay. And so you now generate a couple generations afterwards, you've got people who are interested in, what went down. They want to fill in the holes. And one of the holes that's a gap in their memory, because it just hasn't been available to them, is how did an alliance like NATO react or prepare, or what were they prepared, or what were prepared to do in during this moment, right? Did NATO even care, right? How does any of this information provide a counter narrative to what they've basically been raised with, right? So it's a way to amplify or multiply different perspectives, right, on the singular event. Okay. So for me, applying, taking all of this knowledge, and then I'm like, all right, well, this is important for the Czechs. So how do I make it important for people who are not Czechs, right? How do I get them and again, this is where images, video, right? This is where the background of film studies helps me a lot, right? Because of the ability, and again, because it's archival footage, right? Like I can, play around with it a little bit even, right? Or make selections to highlight certain things. Again, especially if they're documents, right? So again, this is my interest in comics as well. You okay?
yeah, yeah, yeah. I had a
Oh,
lag issue, but we're back now. That's great. You
oh,
turned the
okay, yeah, yeah,
pause.
okay. I wasn't
Yeah,
sure
yeah,
if it lagged.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
So,
So, so go ahead.
just in a nutshell, right? In a nutshell, again, it's just kind of like, what am I doing? I'm figuring out through words, documents, images, photos, music, and putting it either on a mural to draw people's attention, to get their curiosity going, enough to pick up the book that I've published. And the book is usually a collection of all the documents, a selection of the documents organized and edited in a certain kind of way to tell the story, but using the documents themselves. My goal is to get people to take that publication, right? That whatever they see in that 5 minutes or less that they, is interesting enough for them that when they see, oh, there's a free book and catalog that comes with this, I'm going to take it with me and then read it later or give it to someone, right? In other words, I want the work to circulate out beyond just where I put it on the shelf, right? Because then that's where the work really gets to be read, right? It's not going to be, plastering a document on the wall, right? It's going to be in a book format, right? So then it's just like everything's put into context. So then when you read these documents, again, then you kind of understand, oh, this is how the structure works. This is how things, you can recreate a certain kind of perspective. And that's my goal. That's the end goal, right?
Sounds very interesting and rewarding. Is there an exhibition you have done that stands out as possibly the best one?
Well, I think this year has been a pretty banner year for me. I've had a lot of fun in the last 2 years with exhibitions. And again, the two of them reached, at least, the headquarters audience and touched them in very different ways. Um, I did an exhibition so NATO moved headquarters 6 years ago. Okay. The previous headquarters, and that's the headquarters that I worked at when I first arrived, right? NATO had been there for 51 years. And so they were finally moving, right? And so when we moved, there's a lot of, like we took photos of the empty headquarters, before we moved, right? And normally you're not allowed to take photos inside NATO headquarters, right? And so we had all these photos and I held them, like the photographer, who's a very good photographer, I held them and he wanted to do something just as we moved. He's like, "Oh, I got all these great photos. Like, can we do how about we do an exhibition to show?" I'm like, "No, it's too soon. It's too soon. No one cares." Actually, they'll reject it. They're like, "Look, that dump, we've just moved into new digs." Right? I said, give it 5 years at least, right? We'll get the nostalgia archives effect going, right? Time will pass. The time effect will hit. People will forget, they'll start complaining, and then they'll start looking back fondly, and that's when we hit them with it. So that's exactly what we did. I waited 5 years. We brought these photos back out. We made a photo exhibition inside the library at the headquarters, and then we reprinted in large format about 350 of these photos in a large format coffee table book, right? And it was basically aimed, it's a history, a spatial history, and it's just there's no people in the photos. It's just empty rooms, you know, a spatial history, an architectural history, and one where because the rooms were empty, people were filling their own memories inside these spaces because a lot of them had spent a lot of time there, right? And so, the rewarding, and it's one of my favorites because of the effect it had on people. Then, like people really, it brought people together again, right? Especially the few of us that are remaining that used to work in the old headquarters, you know, we were able to kind of, like because there's so many new people coming in, they have no idea, right? It's an old world. It's an ancient world, actually, right? It's a world that doesn't exist anymore, right? But this is where a lot of us came from, right? And so that effect, and to see it, and have the feedback from a lot of my colleagues who, like who were moved by it, like that's totally worth it for me. And then another one I did this earlier this year was, yeah, just actually in September was a digital photo exhibition of behind the scenes photos taken of the Secretary General throughout his 10 years in the job, right? So you had a lot of scenes that we all see the official photos, but not the stuff that you see that leads up to the official photos. And that's the interesting thing, right? And so I showed about 300 of these photos, and again organized them in the fashion so that across 6 screens. So they were basically slideshows, basically 6 slideshows simultaneously going, but each screen devoted to a specific leadership trait or that spoke to the personal leadership style of our Secretary General, right? And so that got a lot of people's interest because these are photos that they'd never seen before, and more importantly, they were sides of a guy that they had never seen before, right? And the guy that we all look up to as the boss, right? And it was just kind of like, and it helped inform and it confirmed the fact how well loved this guy was, right? So when he left, it was a huge outpouring of emotion, right? And so this book helped to, kind of pave the way for that, prepare it, right? Because it was released just before he left, right? It was like a tribute book, right? And so, you ask about, like the emotional kind of um, affect that I'm going for. It's the things like this, like it's because I work in memory, right? And so, you know, how we engage or what memory means to us. And especially here, I'm talking institutional history versus history with a capital H, and then personal history. So how can I engage all of these within the context of the job that I work in to actually move people to actually do something or feel something or reflect on something, right? That's the most rewarding thing, and that's what I go for, every time, right?
I
So how do you
love it.
make people care about pieces of paper, right?
Right. Okay. Um, as the main guide for tours of NATO
Mhm.
HQ, what do people most often insist on telling you?
Well, again, I've been doing the tour gig now. I've been the main point of contact for tours at NATO headquarters for the last 3 years now, right? And so a lot of annoying questions have come and gone, especially, and I think part of it, the questions come based on the current political climate, right? So the usual question I ask, how much does this building cost, right? Like, all right, it's like, well, I mean, there's the cost, it's an ongoing cost, Like you never, it's like you own a house, you never stop, you know, pouring money into it, right? And that's the case with us, right? Because it's constantly growing, right? So it's a moot question for me, right? Just like, and sometimes they'll ask again, a lot of people come on the tours and, they'll ask questions that again, that is not up to me to answer. It is up to my colleagues who work in, for example, communications and public diplomacy. Those are questions best served for them to answer, right? Like, I'm the tour guide. I'm the tour guide of the headquarters. I'm sure I'm talking to you. I talk to people about, I use the building as a tool to talk about the history, right? And so any contemporary issues, and that's where, and again, part of it is the professional line or organizational line, is that I don't cross over into contemporary, issues, and they don't talk, go, they don't, they can't speak, to the historical ones, right? So there's a nice division of labor there, and division of discourse, right? So that's an easy way for me to fend off any kind of questions that are going to be really poking or prodding, right? About, like, say, current issues. So I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy, right? You want to talk to those guys. I got a specific, I got a specific address here, right? So, and in many ways, I am preparing a lot of people because they are going to speak to those people about what's going on today. So, in many times, I'm giving them a little bit of a background. Like, here's the luggage that comes, that you're coming to, and that's saddled with this place. So that when you go into your briefing, you'll have a little better sense, or at least some kind of introduction of, the weight of this place and what's going on and how things go on, right? So again, it's part of that demystifying kind of aspect, right? Like, just kind of like bringing it to the surface. Yes, this is what it is, right?
I'm sure you do get some follow-ups though, and I'm sure you get close to losing your composure at moments if heckled. What do you do to maintain your coolness?
You know, part of it is, you got to remember, right? Is just kind of like, at the end of the day, and this is, like, I know more than they do about what I'm talking about, right? So they can heckle, and then part of it is like, all right, well, it's very easy to point out a heckler within a group situation, is that, well, you're making this all about yourself, pal, right? I mean, like, you are imposing this and kind of taking away from other people's experience, right? So, I mean, I can easily turn it on them, right? Like, again, nothing's gonna, like, it's not gonna like, there's no personal investment in it that, like, I'm gonna get heckled, I'm gonna take it personally, and therefore have an emotional reaction, like you said, lose your cool, right? I mean, like, there's no real point, right? It's just kind of like, it's just like, you can't, well, there's nothing you can really say that's going to bother me, right? At the end, right? Because honestly, right? I mean, like, you're barking up the wrong tree, right? It's wrong-headed, right?
Of
If I don't
course.
have, if I don't know the answer, I'll let you know that, and I'll point you to the colleagues who can answer that question, right? But,
I just
so yeah,
find
I mean, I've had the, let's say, the bored teenager, right? It's like, all right, well, it's like any classroom, right?
right.
Or, or the really kind of curious but intimidated, or, like, so the audience, or the overly knowledgeable, right? I mean, so that, so it's a wide range, and that's the challenge and the fun of the job, right? Is just kind of like, again, it's the same. I approach it in the same way. How do I make these people care, right? They're here, and, I don't want to sit there and just say, and here's the building, the bathrooms are over there, and this is where we do this, and this is where we do this. It's not a very functional tour, right? I treat it as a walking classroom, right? I usually got an hour, and we're walking around, and okay, I'm using the building as a visual aid, just like you would, like, a film clip, right? And, you can speak about, again, what's, the meaning behind it, the symbolism, but, and then also the actions, pointing out things. This is what we do. It's textual analysis. Here's the building itself is a text, right? There's a certain text with subtext, right? And I'm pointing out to you things that you are right in front of you, that if you think about it in a certain kind of way, or I illuminate the context, then you will see it differently, even though what you see is the exact same thing, right? How many times this is what we're doing in film studies, right? Everyone's looking at the same text but reading it differently, right? And so you're sharing exactly what you see to help other people's maybe, enlarging their perspectives, right? And so that's my take on the on that side of the job.
I love it. I just, I sometimes just hate talking about politics these days, and you do it all the time, or how to dodge doing it all the time. So I was just curious about some of your techniques. And
Oh
very,
yeah, because at the end of the day, too, I am not, let's say, authorized to speak on behalf of the organization about, like
Mhm.
about about a certain, what's going on politically right now, right? So again, knowing, it's a good thing to be able to work on an archives to say, well, look, this is my domain. I'm sticking within the past, right? And you know, my backup is all these documents that I can share and show, and like as a bibliography, right? Like, look, this is all like this is I'm just presenting based on the info I got, and
You
here's
sound like Steven Seagal. You're doing Aikido. You're just tossing people out of the way. You're not going to engage on this topic.
it's what's the point, right?
Yeah.
It's not like again, it takes that's not, on if you're going to be that way on a tour, well, that's not the forum to have that discussion because you're taking away from everybody else's experience. That's not the experience that they signed up for,
Yeah.
right? And it's kind of selfish to do that. So what, you're going to make your point? All right, that's fine. I'm sorry, everybody.
Okay. All right. Well, shifting gears a little bit, you've helped work on 20 book collections of NATO archival documents over the past 15 years. What are some of the common tropes that are seen within these books? If
Well,
you want to call it that.
sure. I mean, again, a lot of my experiences have been learning on the job, learning on the fly, right? Because it's not like I had any background in this. Is like I love books. I love thinking about books. I've read a lot of books, especially academic books. So these are kind of this. That's kind of informed. If you want to call it my approach to editing this stuff, right? So it's not just here's a bunch of collections ordered chronologically. There you go.
Uh,
You know, that was in the past, right? And sometimes that's what people expect. But I was like, well, no one's going to read that. You got to read it like a book, right? So, you know, adding, introductory, like again, introductory information, right? Organizing so that it's this like a document is then not. You can use a document as a document, or you can use a document as an image, and I do that quite often, right? And so, there's a story being told, and again, there's text that's written that links to the documents. So the documents kind of illustrate text. And, one can read it in chronological order, organized in chapters, so that what you're getting is, yes, a collection of archival documents, but rearranged and edited in a way that it's to be read like a book, right? So sometimes I've played around just like you would in the film, right? Like, oh, I'm going to start at the end and then recount and the whole book will recount how we got to the beginning, right? And so I've organized things like that. Sometimes I've just decided to take a scrapbook approach and focus only on images and news clippings, right, to tell the story itself because the story has been told so many times, but maybe not with these photos. So I'm going to go that route, right? So I have a lot of freedom with respect to doing these books because each one ends up being, especially as time went on, more and more different.
which one is your favorite?
Again, I'm partial to the photo books because I love images and again placing images in sequential order, right, is fun, right? Because again, you know if people are reading it in as you would in like any kind of book, right? By paying attention to the rhythm of the images, how they play off of each other on a page, how they look on a page, right? Again, I've had great experiences because I'm only publishing the book because I got to know, at the printing stage, right? So I'd learn a lot about paper stock and printing, different kind of printing aspects, different kinds of paper for covers, or how I want to present this, like oh okay, different formats, right? So thinking about all of that, especially as time went on, like I was like, oh, I can really be more experimental, right? And so, yeah, a lot of these photo books, a lot of the, like these are my favorites, right? Because, again, it's telling stories with words and images, which, again, is film for me, which is comics for me. Visual narrative is especially to communicate that, again, ultimately can, encourage some kind of either emotional response or intellectual response. That's the pleasure, right?
I love it. But can you just give us one title, just off the top of your head? It doesn't have to be the like end all be all of
Sure. Well,
yeah.
I did a simple, again, there's two of them. The two that I spoke about before, the photos of the old headquarters, it's called Layers of Time,
Uh-huh.
right? And the final snapshots of the old NATO headquarters.
Okay.
And then the one about our Secretary General, it was just simply titled Jens, which is his first name,
I see.
right? Because the idea was by just using his first name, on a first name basis, it's a little more, and he's our big boss. We would call him Sir or Mr. Secretary General, but never Jens. But that's how he introduces himself, right? He's that relaxed, right? And so that in itself was the clue that no, you're going to get a look into the personal side of this guy, the guy that he is, right? And so those are two of the recent ones that I had a lot of fun with and, mean a lot to me.
Well, it sounds like a secure guy, and a guy people could learn something for their own lives. So, as an international press correspondent for the International Journal of Comic Art, do you see, again, particular tropes across European museums and festivals?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that having been the international correspondent for since 2010, I've been going to especially the Angoulême Comics International Festival, for the last 15 years now, 14 years probably.
Uh,
Yeah, I see a lot, I see a variety of approaches to exhibitions, right?
mm,
And in fact, there's some that I learn every time because I think about it in terms of my own work. What works, what doesn't? What kind of oh, that's a great idea. How can I steal that? Or a mental note. This is a really smart approach. Or vice versa. Actually, this is a good example of a nice try, but it doesn't work. It's too much, right? And so, yeah, like it is that interplay already between words and images, but within now a meta structure of words and images in an exhibition context, right? So you're seeing sometimes, all right, well, what's the point of, you almost have to ask yourself, putting original art on the wall. All right, so, well, A, that's not necessarily how it was meant to be seen, right? Like these are printing elements ultimately, right? But they're being valorized in a certain kind of way, like a painting, right? And so it changes context, right? And so at what point does, and that's one of the things that I do, think about a lot. It's like, okay, at what point, how much does context change in the way certain, again, the page is presented, or a series of pages, right? Or what are different ways are you going to get people to read this stuff other than admiring it for, again, it's like taking one film clip and just putting it up there and say this bit's supposed to be representative of, the rest of the work, right? It's just like, well, no, it's a little out of context, right? But how do you draw them in? How does, and that's the key, right? Because most people sometimes, again, so it's a toss up. You either have read the comic and know it very well, or you don't know a clue. You have no idea,
mhm.
right? So how, convince me to read this. Tell me why this is special, right? Why should, this is being consecrated for some kind of reason, but I'm new to this. So what's it gonna take me? Is this gonna convince me to go down and buy the book on the stand? Because they made a great argument. So yeah, it's all about, many times it is about arguing it's how worthwhile this stuff is. Otherwise, it wouldn't be exhibited, right? So, it's one of the things I like the most about what's going on in European festivals and for comics exhibitions is the scenography approach, right? So
Mm.
it's just not like a gallery approach, but you're walking into just like a set, like like they've actually designed with great production design, the world of the artist, and then and the piece of art and the piece of work, the art, the book, or the body of work, and then all the pages, all the actual, and it goes beyond just showing pages. It's actually showing artifacts, right? Like the original, let's say, album or comic or pamphlet, right? Posters or anything like that that's linked to it, right? So to be able to see, oh, okay, it's one thing to see original art, but to see, oh, this is the actual original publication. This is the original form that it came out and how people used to read it.
Huh.
That's interesting because you never see that anymore. You don't see old. Again, we're moving to digital. So people have the feel of paper, right? Old formats, right? To see how people, or, even the cheap printing as well, right? Everything's too clean right now. Everything's too bright, right? But to see how pulpy this stuff is, right? That's interesting, right? So yeah, I think that's one of the major focuses these days right now. It's where it's moving for the
I love it.
museum.
I'm running out of time, so I had to skip a couple of questions, but I want to thank you so much for your time. Is there a final thought you would like to end this interview with?
Thanks for taking the time to reach out and talk to me. I think, one of the things that I've learned, especially again, what we have in common is that we gone to Carleton Film Studies.
Yeah,
And like it's that program had a major effect on my life. I wouldn't be where I am if not for everything that I learned through Carleton Film Studies. I mean, and sometimes, like again, you study film, you don't study the making of films, you're studying how to read films. I'm like, absolutely. Well, where's the money in that? I'm like, well, a guy like me can end up doing what I do because it's all about figuring out, analyzing, communicating, interpreting, thinking, and sharing, right? That's why we do this.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time.